Good afternoon and welcome to our HIV Prevention and Education Virtual Summit presentation entitled The Necessity of Village Building for Body Autonomy, Health, Advocacy, and Equity. Day 3, Value, Voice, and Village. Today we are joined by Davlin Hill, Dr. Dominique Vadrine, and Dr. Krista Hughes from Speaking Down Barriers, an organization whose mission is equity for all. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few reminders. Viewers, please make sure your mics are muted. The chat box is disabled, but you can ask questions using the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. Remember, this presentation is being recorded. Q&A will take place at the end of the presentation. At this time, I will turn it over to our wonderful panelists so that they can begin their presentation. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Greetings. I'm Dr. Dominique Vadrine, and my colleagues and I are happy to be here with you today from Speaking Down Barriers. And I'd like to take a moment just to tell you a little bit of our history. We were an organization, we're a nonprofit organization located here in upstate South Carolina. And we were created approximately 8.5 years ago by our founder, Marlanda DeKine, also a poet goes by the name of Sapient Soul. And Reverend Scott Neely coming together and recognizing how important it is for our community, people in our community, to be able to talk about difficult topics or topics that were considered taboo, specifically race, around racism. And so they came together and created something known as Poetry and Conversation, because they noticed that poems and poetry would be a very good medium through which to connect people. And recognize that our differences are actually sources of strength, even though society often tells us that those differences can be points of contention. We see it differently. So on behalf of Speaking Down Barriers here in South Carolina, we say hello and welcome you. So our mission, as Kat stated, is equity for all. And we do mean that. And the way in which we believe we can achieve that is by working towards 2 strategic imperatives simultaneously. And the first one is ending oppression. And we mean all forms of oppression, because we believe that systems of oppression are interconnected, right? And so in order to eradicate racism, we have to eradicate sexism, we have to eradicate homophobia, transphobia, we have to eradicate xenophobia, all the isms out there, ableism, and unfortunately the list goes on. In addition, we also think it's important for us to value everyone. And when we say this, it's like, well, yeah, value everyone, right? But actually, we know oftentimes in our society, specifically, we may be taught to believe that our value is based on what we do, right? Are you a good person? What have you achieved? How much money do you make? But in actuality, we believe that your value is inherent. You're just born with it. The fact that you're breathing and you're a human being, you are valuable, you are valued. Period. Your sense of worth can't be added onto or taken away from. And that can be challenging sometimes for us to value people when we have ideological differences than they do, than the ones that they share, or when people engage in behaviors that we believe to be abhorrent, right? They still are of value. I may not appreciate the behavior that they engaged in, but they as human beings are indeed valuable. And then lastly, we also want to remember that unfortunately, there are communities that are marginalized in our society. And so sometimes we internalize what society tells us. So if you are from a marginalized community, society can look at you in a different way and make you think that you're less than, and then you unfortunately internalize this and believe this. And we have to recognize that we're all valued, all of us, regardless of what society tells you or regardless of what you feel, your value is inherent. So that is our mission, equity for all through ending all forms of oppression and valuing everyone.
Thank you, Dominique. My name is Krista Hughes. My pronouns are she, her, and I also want to welcome you to this space today. What we're offering today is a webinar, but very often what we do in our community is hold dialogues, and we have a group of a set of community agreements that we abide by. And we feel like they really capture much of what we're talking about today in this presentation, which is value, voice, and village. And these are also the community agreements by which we, the presenters, will abide by as we offer this presentation. And so even though we don't have a full dialogue today, we really wanted to share these community agreements that are so key for holding the space of the work we do, whatever that work is and wherever it is. The first is I will show up and choose to be present. And if one is here, then you are present. But it's also the case that we have a lot of distractions in our lives, especially when we are in a Zoom space like this. We're all in other physical spaces. We have magical little machines close at hand that can keep us from being present in the space. And we also find that sometimes we talk about some hard things in these spaces, and it can be easy to even mentally check out. So we encourage everyone who shows up to really try to arrive here in body, mind, and spirit. And we'll be doing something in a few minutes that will help us do that. We also agree to speak from our own individual experience. Because we value everyone, we understand that every single person has valuable experiential knowledge to share, and this is a foundation of our conversation. We also find that when we speak from our own experience, it will keep us from making generalizations that may paper over difference of experience. And so it's just a way, it's also a way of honoring every single person. I will value people and share the space equitably. We will be the ones talking today, but it's really important when we hold dialogue that we make sure that everyone has an opportunity to share and that everyone's voice is heard. I will not try to be right or perfect. This can be a hard one in a culture that also places value on notions of rightness or perfection. And yet we are doing some challenging work of transforming our communities. We make mistakes. And so what we strive for with Speaking Down Barriers is not perfection. We also like to note that perfection and perfectionism are characteristics of white supremacy culture. And we seek to challenge those characteristics and offer a counter understanding of how we show up in the world. I will respect people's pronouns. Pronouns are one way of expressing one's gender expression. And we work very hard to honor where everyone is, and this includes respecting people's pronouns and the names by which they go, which is why we have our pronouns in our Zoom boxes. And if we could see you, we would ask you to place your name and pronouns there. I will treat what is shared in this space as sacred and hold it in confidence. We certainly want you to take out of this space important lessons and insights. But what we want you to leave in this space is people's own personal stories, which belong to them. So unless you have explicit permission to share the details of one story, we ask that you hold that in confidence. And finally, this is a brave space. There is not necessarily a promise of safety here. The work we do is courageous work. We try to show up and learn together, and we tackle some really hard topics. And so, you know, a range of things may pop up around violence, sexual assault, mental or emotional health, things around that might be uncomfortable or perhaps triggering. And we also want to note that it is a brave thing to do to leave the space if you need to, if it becomes overly uncomfortable or triggering. But we also want you to know that this is a space where everyone is respected. And so we hope that you can be in this space with us. And even as you listen, we'll consider abiding by these community agreements. Another key piece of the way Speaking Down Barriers does its work We have found over the years that in tackling these challenging conversations, it's really, really easy. And I say this as somebody who works full-time in higher education. It's very easy for everything to happen in our heads. And yet so much of this, so much of what we're talking about actually circulates through the body. So we want to take a moment. We invite you wherever you are, and we're going to do a little bit of a grounding and intention just by taking some deep breaths. And I'd invite you wherever you are to either close your eyes or gaze softly in front of you, and uncross your legs if you're able. And we're just going to take 3 deep breaths together, and I will count us down to taking that breath. So I'll count 3, 2, 1, and then invite us to breathe in deeply. So 3, 2, 1, inhale. And if you're able, hold that inhale for just a couple of beats. And then exhale. And give it a good exhale, even let it come out of the mouth with a noise, if that's helpful. So let's do 2 more. I'll count down. 3, 2, 1, inhale. Hold. Exhale. 3, 2, 1, inhale. Hold. And exhale. And then just let your breathing return to its normal state. And one thing we'll invite you to do as we move forward with this presentation is to just invite you to think about what you hope to carry out of our presentation today for yourself personally. Just invite you to think about that for yourself.
Thank you, Krista and Dominique. I feel so much better. I didn't know how much I needed that breath. My name is Davelyn, as Kat said, and I use she, her pronouns. Excited to be in the space. I'm the executive director of Speaking Down Barriers, as well as obviously a facilitator, a poet, a painter, and yeah, I enjoy all things travel as well. So a little bit about me before we do this. I think just saying travel works nicely into what we're talking about next, which is land acknowledgement. We began to think about how important it is to do a land acknowledgement when thinking about us being grounded in a particular place that has a particular history and a particular people of that history. And to see Indigenous folks, Native folks in the land do land acknowledgements is something I think we were like, oh, we can learn from people who are in the present who do something that is very meaningful. Not only meaningful because it connects us to the actual place where we live, you know, the place where we stand, the place where we have families, the place where we do all of our work, but also it roots us in a history that is not pretty, a history that is violent, but also a history that connects us to the resilience of people in the land who are here now. So I'm going to read one that is created by Adrian Wong of Spiderweb, but I wanted to kind of give a little context before we get started. So we would like to offer a land acknowledgement, a statement that pays respect to the Indigenous peoples who stewarded the land we currently occupy. This image is a view across North Georgia from the top of Blood Mountain that was taken by one of our facilitators, Scott Neely. And in addition to acknowledging the gorgeous land that was violently ceded by colonizers, I want to honor the land I'm on in Greer, South Carolina, of the Cherokee and the Catawba, people past and present. I'm also going to share this acknowledgement of the digital space using the words of Adrian Wong. Since our activities are shared digitally to the internet, let us also take a moment to consider the legacy of colonization embedded within technology structures and the ways of thinking we use every day. We're using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many Indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of the art we make leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to changing climates that disproportionately affect Indigenous people, people of color, Black people worldwide. I invite you to join us in acknowledging all of this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good use of this time, and for each of us to consider what are our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship. Please find time to learn and honor, the land that you're on, where you're residing, and support organizations that uplift the folks where you live. I know that the Land Back campaign is one that is doing work all across the country to think about what reparations look like in the land where the folks who were and are still impacted. So we like to take a moment here. I don't know how you would like to do it. I just take a moment of silence to be thankful for the land and thankful for the resilience of the people. Or if you want to take a moment to think about and jot down some ways that you would like to support. So we're going to take about 60 seconds for that. Well, maybe not 60, 30. Thank you.
So today we are reflecting on 3 interconnected concepts: value, voice, and village. And so as we enter that reflection, we wanted to invite you to think about what word comes up for you when you hear the word value. We've got a few things on the screen, so we've already given away a little bit of some of the things we think about, but we do want to pause and allow you to think about what the word value brings up for you. So for us, there are different dimensions of that word value. Over on the left-hand side, you can see that we thought about money, right? Value is often thought about in monetary terms. We have the image of a sales sticker, so a good value. That made me think about Walmart. That's always touting their good set value sale, right? So that comes up. We also do a lot of work with a variety of people thinking about the values that they hold, and those are those sticky notes you see there. What are the different values? Moral values, ethical values, emotional, cultural values, and you can see those there. We've got an image of community, perhaps of justice with those held hands raised high in solidarity with each other. And we have a very tender picture of a child being bathed by someone who appears to love that child and be loved by that child. So these are some images or words, ideas that came up. And we just encourage you to think about the different ways the term value can be understood, certainly more than what's here. And Dominique's going to take us deeper into that conversation, but we just kind of wanted to start with laying out the many dimensions of the word value.
Thank you, Dr. Hughes. I really do appreciate you sharing with us the different dimensions of the term value. And we thought it would be very beneficial and important for us to have an operational definition that we shared today, so that way we're on the same page of the same book when it comes to the term value. So the definition that we chose to work with is from Dr. Donna Hicks, and she sees value as an interwoven concept with the term dignity. And so the definition we have here is from her book, Leading with Dignity. And so she reminds us that dignity is our inherent value and worth as human beings. Everyone is born with it, right? So it's inherent. Dignity is an internal state of peace that comes with the recognition and acceptance of the value and vulnerability of all living things. So we want to take a moment, and as we stated, part of Speaking Down Barriers and its starting came with poetry. And so there's a poem here by Ben L. Scott named Your Value. And we just want to remind you that this is a brave space, and we do appreciate people being brave and doing what it is that they feel is necessary to take care of themselves. So if you were to be emotionally triggered by something that was said here, we do want you to be brave and do what you need to do. If it means stepping away and attending to your needs the best way possible, we encourage you to do that.
Let me speak to that person that feels like they lost their worth or their value. This is a dollar bill. Now, if I go to the store and there's something for 90 cents, can I buy it with this dollar bill? Okay, all right. So if I go to the store and there's something for 85 cents and after tax, it ends up being 96 cents, can I buy it with this dollar bill? Okay, all right. So what if I ball the dollar bill up? Think about it now. Like, I just balled the dollar bill up, like, so it can't be worth $1 now. It's probably worth like 95 cents, right? How much you think it's worth? $1. Listen, y'all gotta pay attention. I just balled it up, so clearly it's not worth $1 anymore. All right, so maybe, what if I step on it? What if I stomp it? I just stomped it. How much is it worth now? Maybe 65 cents, 68 cents? It's still worth $1? Okay, what if I ball it up, what if I stomp on it, and then I put it in the trash can, and it's sitting here with some trash, and it's around some beer, and some gum, and a bunch of other nasty stuff, and some guy off the street pulls the dollar out, unfolds it, how much is it worth now? Maybe 82 cents? And come on, at least 92 cents? It's okay, all right, so what if I ball it up, what if I step on it, what if I put it in trash, and then, watch this, I tear it in half. Think about it now, right? How much is it worth now? $1? I could tape it? Whoa. Shh. Wait. Wait a second. I just balled it up. I just stepped on it. I put it in trash. I pulled it out. Then I tore it in half. And you mean to tell me I can pick the dollar up, I can wipe it off, and I can put some tape around it, and it's still worth $1? Then why, if this dollar doesn't lose its worth or its value, then why do you feel like you've lost your worth of value? Because many of you feel like you've been stepped on, you feel like you've been pushed aside, you feel like you've been abandoned, you feel like you've been talked about, you feel like you've been abused, like someone took from you, someone hurt you, somebody took advantage of you, and deep down inside your core, you feel like you've lost some of your value. And I am here to tell you today that this dollar still has worth and value, because there are some men years ago who put value over this life and said that no matter what happens to it, it can still be taped back together. It can still be wiped off. And I am here to tell you that you were created and you're born and you're here and you have life and you have purpose and you have value. And though you've gone through some hard times and though you've experienced some depression and you might be wanting to hurt yourself or you might want to give up, I am here to tell you still got worth and value. And there is nothing that can happen that can take your worth and your value away. So what you gotta do now is you gotta pick yourself up. You gotta dust yourself off and you gotta keep moving.
So we want to take a moment, listening to that, watching and listening to that poem, Your Value, I think by Ben L. Scott, for me was very key on helping to solidify that definition of, value. It's inherent, right? It's inherent. But something that often comes up is people often mistake dignity for respect. Like if I value you, I respect you, right? It's the same thing. But in actuality, what my understanding is that dignity is unconditional, right? It's not dependent on behaviors or actions, whereas respect is something that I've been taught is earned through our behaviors, right? It's contingent upon certain factors. And it's determined by the giver of the respect. Whereas dignity and value that we just talked about is just inherent, you have it. But this can be very hard. This can be very hard because some people are like, well, I don't respect you, so I don't value you, right? You don't have worth or dignity in my mind. And we wanted to take a moment and talk about this because even in preparing for this, we noticed something amongst us as facilitators. So I want to have Dr. Hughes and Ms. Hill, both of you will come off mute just to talk about and share some of the things that we noted that happened when we were talking about dignity and respect.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Rodrine. I, for sure, am one of those people that feel like when I encounter someone, they get respect. They automatically respect folks when I meet them. And I hold those dignity and respect really kind of close to each other. So for me, even if you maybe lose respect in one area, I would still be really open to hearing about other things or other areas. Like I try really hard to see the complexity in folks. And so I would still be respecting people. And they're like, what? What about this and this and this? And I'm like, well, that was that. That's not their whole person. And so I was connecting dignity and value as kind of the same thing in a way, I think, when we were talking earlier, that I have been pressed on in our conversations.
Yeah, so we did have an interesting conversation because I tended to more agree with the notion that Dr. Rodrine was talking about. I think that perhaps because I do tend to be fairly generous and I try to think the best of people, that I not only affirm the dignity of all people, but I try to grant people a certain level of respect. But people can lose my respect. They don't lose dignity in my mind, but they can lose my respect. And that doesn't mean that I don't value their wholeness. And, you know, as we started talking about this, we realized we might be landing in a similar place, but using different vocabulary. Because I do think that every person is worthy, absolutely inherent value and worth. And I want to say that I would give people chance after chance, but there are some people who have lost my respect, especially when they have harmed other people, when they have engaged in significant harm, perhaps been challenged about that and continued to perpetuate that harm. It's very difficult for me to maintain respect for them. So it's tricky. I aspire to your openness and your hope, Davelin Hill.
I think it's interesting because it's like, how do you showing folks that you still honor, that you still believe in their dignity once you've lost their respect is a really hard thing, because people do connect them together. And so when we say, you know, we lost my respect and so I'm treating you differently, it's like, well, what about the dignity? And you're like, no. I still believe in your personhood. I don't think you're less than, but still the way I treat you is going to be different. And so it's hard to communicate that. So I'm looking forward to, like, I think community is a huge place where that's, you know, played out. Like, how do you do that when there's harm and in the village? So maybe that's for another webinar.
Another webinar, and it makes me realize, you know, I didn't think about this when we first had the conversation. Now I want to rethink, is it that maybe you're challenging me to rethink, maybe they don't lose my respect, but they do lose my trust.
Yes.
And that is, that's also a challenge for community building. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you both, because I'm like, then my definition of respect may be different than what the two of you have. So that is also for another webinar. But thank you. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to take another moment to breathe before we talk about and think about our voices. Without some good deep breath, we can't use our voice. So I'm going to just invite you, wherever you are, to breathe on your own this time. I'm going to give us about a minute to just breathe at our own pace. And again, you can close your eyes or gaze softly. All right. So I wanted us to not only take a moment to breathe, but also to have a moment of intentional silence or chosen silence, because we also want to talk about voice in relation to remaining silent. And so I wanted to, we wanted to make a distinction between the silences that we choose and desire, and the silences that we might not choose if we weren't limited. One of our greatest inspirations as an organization, Speaking Down Barriers, a foremother of this organization is Audre Lorde. And here's a quote to ponder. When we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard or welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak. And so we'd like to just take a moment for you to think about, you who are participating. If you have a pen and a piece of paper nearby, you could jot some things down. And we'd like you to think about a time in your life when you were tempted to remain silent. A time in your life when you were tempted to remain silent. And we now want you to reflect on a time. It may be the time you've already thought about, or it may be a different one, that you were tempted to remain silent, but you overcame that fear or that anxiety and you chose to speak. A time that you overcame that temptation or desire to remain silent and you chose to speak. And as you hold hold those stories from your own lives in your mind. We're going to think about some of the reasons we may not use our voice. We can move forward to the next slide. It's really important to think about what gets in the way of our using our voice and our voices. When we ask what that temptation is, there's no judgment there. There are a lot of very good reasons to remain silent. There are fear of repercussions and retaliation. And again, these are legitimate fears. As we list these fears up here, we want to make sure you hear us saying this is not just an emotion. These are realities. There can be fear of losing friendships. There can be fear of being seen as a problem. Sometimes we do not use our voices because there is frustration over not having been heard in the past, and therefore feeling like one's voice does not matter. There's not being heard, and then there's also being proactively dismissed, right? People say something and it's ignored or just outright dismissed and just given either respect or dignity, we might say. And even beyond that on a spectrum, there is the potential that someone who uses their voice may experience gaslighting, being told that their understanding of reality is false, even though it is true. And this is this is obviously a big issue in our culture. Not only people, but entire communities are regularly gaslit in our society. Many marginalized groups who do have voices. And the issue of voice is so powerful. We sometimes hear in a society that we need to, that those of us who are working on the front lines need to be the voice for the voiceless. But the reality is everyone has a voice. It's just a matter of whether those voices are being heard, being listened to, being respected, and being honored. So, Dr. Vadrine, would you add anything to this?
Yes, two things, Dr. Hughes, that you mentioned that I really appreciate and want to expound on just a little bit was when you stated, especially those in the forefront, some of us who do have privilege and power in certain areas have been trained to believe that I need to come in and, fight for this and, give a voice to the voiceless, right? And in some ways we, in turn, reinforce the very thing that we're not wanting to do. Because as you stated, everyone has a voice, right? So maybe this is where we come in as, in community with and not do this for, right? But be in community with and hear those voices. What is it that they want? How can we be of support? The other thing that I wanted to say is there could be a fear of me not minding my business. That is something that our society, it being very individualistically oriented, sometimes like, well, you need to just mind your business, right? So if I see somebody's being abused and being fearful of whoever the person is abusing them, I might not call out for help. And we see that happening a great deal now because we see people, videotaping things, unfortunately, where violence is happening, but not calling for help. Or doing something to, for that purpose. So I wanted to say sometimes that gets in the way too.
Absolutely. Thank you for those.
I think this discussion could go on for like a billion years. Could just stay with voice and value, kind of thinking about, is my voice valuable? Am I heard? Do I matter? And so I think to move it into village building is to buck against the system of I am the only one who can say the thing, or I am the only one with the special knowledge, or if I don't do it, no one will do it. It's like, well, actually, If we are part of a village, especially for us, when we think about multi-ethnic village building, then you don't have to. It's not all on you, it's on us. And so we've been using this definition of village building all week. This is part 3 of our webinar series. So we'd love it if you have the opportunity to go back and watch the other 2. But village building is creating meaningful connections, excuse me, that create and nurture belonging and help people access resources through advocacy and care. Village building can also help us develop strategies and work toward collective liberation. When we talk about Audre Lorde, our foremother, I have to take a pause because of her ideas around all of this. She is a champion for all of these things, for voice, value, and village. And so to kind of come after her is to think about all the ways that we build on the knowledge of people who've come before us. And so though we are sharing this webinar and sharing our own experiences and the knowledge of others, we acknowledge that we are on the shoulders of greatness before us. And so we have to bring up Bell Hooks and All About Love, and Resmaa Menakem, some of his thoughts around the body, and Dr. Joy DeGruy. There's just, I could be here for 5 minutes talking about all the people who we've read and who have been a part of our praxis for village building. But what I wanted to point out is the advocacy and care can be a part of our village building. That it's not just about justice work, but it could be about simple things that we think about, like caring for people through meals, caring for people through taking care of them when they're ill, making sure people have access to systems and resources. Because sometimes just navigating a system is a whole days, weeks, months, year work, knowing what form to get you access to this thing could set off care. You just set off care for folks. So village building is really important along the different areas of multi-ethnic, because sometimes white people have access that Black people don't. And sometimes people have language access. I have language access that maybe some of my friends don't have. And so it's important to build that, that village so that collective care and collective liberation is possible. The Kimberly Crenshaw, who has been in the news lately as we talk about critical race theory and intersectionality. And so I just want to point out her thoughts on and her wisdom on intersectionality has been a part of our work as well. And so if we aren't intersectional, meaning that we are able to see the multiple identities and oppressions that come with different marginalized communities in society, then some of us, the most vulnerable, are going to fall through the cracks. And I think the thing to remember here is that many of us can be the most vulnerable at different points in our lives, depending on what intersections are happening. As a Black queer woman, something happens, I'm falling through the cracks. As someone else, as we get older or experience some kind of physical illness, we're the most vulnerable. What if we lose housing for whatever reason? Because some people, it's like one check, one payment, and you're, houseless, evicted, then you're the most vulnerable. And so it's not just saying, oh, those people, it's realizing I am those people. I could be those people. We are, I am, because we are. We need each other. And so that's what I really love about this quote from Kimberly Crenshaw. So we wanted to think about, okay, so how do you put all this together? You got voice, you got value, you got the village, you got advocacy. What does it actually mean? How does it look? Well, we have a couple of examples for you to look at. One is my sister's house, which is in Memphis, Tennessee. And the Black trans woman at the bottom, her name is Kayla Gore. And she started my sister's house, which is making tiny houses for Black trans women in the area where she lives in Memphis, so that folks have housing. Because they're having housing issues. It's middle of the pandemic and before, it's like, what am I gonna do? Well, perhaps together we will build a village. And through this village, at first, I'm gonna use my house as the starting point. And then I'm gonna see if I can advocate for policy, advocate for fundraising, start a nonprofit, build a community of people who work together with me. And then we're gonna see if we can get a housing community for folks to have safety. And so I've seen, via the internet and lots of some documentaries, Kayla's, movement in this area. And there are people with tiny houses who are living safely. You can't have safety without housing. and safety is a human rights issue when it comes to housing. And so to see folks come together in their village, use their voices, because some people say, oh, well, Black trans women don't have voices. Well, clearly they have voices, though though the violence is perpetrated against them at a huge astronomical amounts, it doesn't mean that takes away your power to use your voice in any way you can. And so strengthened by each other and strengthened by community, they've been able to do that. We move over to the right to the House of Tulip, which is, it's a house for folks who are trans to have a stable place. There's offering of all kinds of particular things that they would need. Paperwork, changing driver's licenses, finding out where to get particular care, who's safe to get care from as far as doctors and nurses go. And so House of Tulip, you'll see the bottom picture are the folks who kind of started that together. And the person in the middle, her name is Mariah Moore. And Mariah also ran for office in New Orleans, just saying, hey, I'm gonna not only work together to build this housing for all of us to have safety, but I'm also gonna try to be a part of system change and be a part of policy change and run for office. That for me is like, that's it. It's like I'm using my voice. I believe I'm valuable and I can be a part of I can be a part of government for all of us, not just for trans folks, but I also am gonna make sure we have somewhere to live because safety is super important. And so even though I have safety, I have a place to live, I am taken care of, but I also want to make sure that everybody else is taken care of because as my community goes, so I go. And so I just wanted to mention both of those opportunities. You can look them up on the internet because they are both fundraising if you want to give to folks who are doing this work. And then we move over to the national bailout. Started in Atlanta. A bunch of community organizers got together to think about how can we get Black mothers. At the time it was just mothers. Now it's birth persons or people who have a word just escaped me. Guardians, thank you. People who are guardians in their families, how can they take care of the kids if they're not there, or are aging parents if they're not there? And sometimes when people are awaiting pretrial labor, they are waiting for money to be able to pay so they can get out. It's like, I don't have the money, so I'm just gonna have to wait until I have my appearance before court and see if I can get bail and see if I can get out. It's like, why are people waiting and languishing when they're like, sometimes it can be as little as $500 or $100, but you don't have it. It's like, so it doesn't feel little. It's like, it's huge. And so how do people get out while they're awaiting trial? So go ahead.
Sorry, Tatlin. I also, there's also this caveat. Oftentimes people think, well, maybe they shouldn't do anything and they wouldn't have to be in the situation. But there's a lot of research that's shown that oftentimes, that first of all, they haven't been proven guilty, but there's several times where people have not been guilty and have been in jail for over a year waiting for trial. And one person in particular, I think it's Khalil Broward story. Mm-hmm. He was a young man who was stopped by police officers in New York City as he was coming out of a train station. Yeah. They stopped him, thought he did something. He didn't. He was put in jail, didn't have the money for bail. His family didn't have the money for bail. He was there for over a year and a half, experienced tremendous abuse. People came to him and tried to get him legal aid to get out. Upon getting out, Jay-Z met him, and all this other stuff, but he ended up killing himself.
Yeah.
After that. Yeah. So, I just wanted to put that caveat out there that oftentimes people think, well, don't do anything. And, nothing will happen to you. He didn't do anything.
Yeah, I love how people do that. It's like, just think about, this is what you need to do in the future to keep out of that. I know that it's people managing their own anxiety. It's like, oh, I don't want this to happen to me, so I just don't do anything. But that is not the case for many folks. And if we're gonna really believe that we're innocent until proven guilty, if that's gonna be the through line in all of what we say, then like carrying it out so it's consistent around everybody is something that I think as a nation kind of considering that maybe we should do that. But when you think about all of notice that there's lots of Black women being behind bars, waiting for waiting for trial. And so how could they be of assistance? And so a group of community organizers decided to take up funds and commit to paying this fee so folks could get out of jail and while they're awaiting trial. And then help with resources in getting back to the court dates, also making sure that the families had some funds for what they needed, had groceries, just really taking care of wraparound support for the families totally. So they have total care. And so that's where the national bailout started. You can do that every year. Even now, there are people still taking funds and connecting with families on the outside so they can get folks out who are awaiting trial, because that's just an unnecessary way for, it's like economics on the exploitation of folks. It's really terrible. So, but there are people doing something about it, yay. And so we think about the last little thing there. It says you can't social distance inside a cage. Those were people who were, experiencing incarceration saying, you're telling us to social distance, but we can't do it. So how can we help? So that led to folks really campaigning for people to get out during COVID, especially people who had nonviolent offenses and people who are awaiting trial. Hey, we can do this at home. So there's lots of bump up in the house arrests and all of that, but that's a whole other issue. We could talk about it in a different webinar. But it did make it so that folks were able to be home and while we're in this pandemic. So there's a way that you can change and advocate for people. And we do that along lines of a village. You can really connect with people who you know and are walking with. So one other part we wanted to think about is we're going to share, but we would like for you to think about as well. How can we use our voice to promote the dignity and value of the village? How can you use your voice with the people you already know? We talked a little bit about in the last webinar that we have a village. And so as things comes up in your village, that's how you know what you can work toward, what you can advocate about. The people in your village, I've noticed that a lot of people are dealing with not having housing in my village. Well, what does that look like to use my voice, to believe that we have dignity, and to together work toward that issue? And so it's not necessarily allowing things from the outside to come in, but using the advocacy because you are experiencing this alongside people in your village. So when I think about this, I think about COVID. For me, I had COVID. I'm a person with disabilities. And so the people actually on the screen right now, both Dominique and Krista were a part of helping me and my family get through COVID. Without them, there was meals, there was checking in, there was not only meals and checking in, but thinking about what can you do with vitamins, because I didn't know there was like this whole vitamin protocol that you could take for COVID that people were doing, and we're spreading it along village lines. It wasn't necessarily coming from the doctors, but then later on it started to come from the doctors. So it started at the village level. And so what does that look like? I just wanted to share that. I've been talking a lot, so I'm going to share the space with Dominique and Krista.
Go ahead, Dr. Vadrine.
So when I think about this, how can we use our voice to promote the dignity and value of the village? I do know that I tend to be pretty attentive to what's going on in my small neighborhoods and stuff. And at one point, there was just a couple of families that something just seemed a little bit off with regards to them, with school time, because I know they had kids and stuff, and I didn't know if they were homeschooling. But what ended up happening was they were immigrants, refugees actually, and very concerned about what would happen to them. And so I befriended them and assisted them with being able to get information about what they could do, so they were even afraid to ask questions in the school system, but their kids wanted to go to school with my kids. So just enabling them to have information was very helpful, so that they didn't have to be fearful about what would happen if they went to ask. And so that enabled them to have the ability to then go ahead and get schooling for their kids. So that's just one example.
So thank you both. One of you talked about a social network. Another one of you has talked about your neighborhood. And my example is from my workplace. I think it just shows that we are all members of lots of different villages, right? And so want us to really think expansively by what we mean by village. I work on a college campus, and I've really tried to use my voice to promote the dignity and value of our students. Obviously, that is something one would want to presume that a college would take care of their students. But sometimes there's just lack of knowledge or not good observations about what some of our students might need. And so I've been a part of groups that have worked really hard to amplify the voices, not just step in, but amplify the voices of some of our students. So for example, making sure that our international students who may not be able to get home over a holiday like our domestic students would, that they've got food and places to go if they're not going home with a friend. And just really thinking about what it is to build a campus of belonging. We have a very diverse campus, but we are not always as inclusive as we need to be, and we don't always reach that culture of belonging where everyone can feel they belong. And it's a growing edge, and we've made a lot of steps, and we've got more steps to make. So that's the village that I do a lot of my work around value and dignity and voice in, and encouraging our students to use their voices, right? Making sure they know that their voices and perspectives matter is a huge part for me of what it means to be an educator.
Thank you both for sharing. It's true. We are always, well, not always, we can be always building different villages that have kind of systems going over and overlapping that then create an access point for us to be able to help and give and encourage and advocate for not only for ourselves and our immediate families, but also for our extended families and people who come into us through our third place, as we like to call it. You know, you have your home and your work, and then your third place where a lot of us spend time, whether it be a church or an organization we give to. But we can be an advocate all across those places using our voice and our value. I just wanted to share a poem. It's very short, but it's also the way that we do advocacy in our work of Speaking Down Barriers. We use poetry to push conversations forward. We use poetry to connect to a larger narrative that's going on in our world. We use poetry to tell a first person story to people to connect to one another. And so I just wanted to, this poem is about COVID, and it is about illness, and it is about death. So take a moment, if you need to take a moment for yourself and breathe it out, or if you need to settle, or if you need to like turn my voice off for a moment, it's about a minute. So you can do that if you need to. I'm gonna pause for just a beat. The title of this poem is Surgeon General Says Sleeping While Black Could Kill You. I am a Black queer woman with COVID, along with my mother, my father, and my brother. I awakened for the 10th time tonight, gasping for air. It didn't matter that I said my prayers, wore my healing crystals, or drank sleepy time tea with honey. The virus still attacked my body like the rioters who attacked the Capitol, red hot with fever and rage, search and destroy mission to kill the hope. Slept covered in a thin white sheet, surrounded by my childhood memories and frames, birthday parties and Christmases and trophies. The dreams come. I hear gunshots in my sleep. I wake for the 11th time, startled, unlike Breonna Taylor, who never awakened, covered in a thin white sheet. In honor of Breonna Taylor. We want to thank you for just logging in, spending time with us as we get to talk about our voice, our value in village building, and how that works in advocacy. There's lots of questions, at least for me, that get awakened by webinars. So I hope that that happened for you as well, and that you'll do what you need to search out the answers to those questions. But we thank you for staying with us. And here's ways you can join us. Go to speakdownbarriers.org. We have a link tree where you can come to some of our events. Many of them are still online because we believe we're still in the pandemic. It didn't just end. So if you want to come and join us, please do. We are reading Reparations Now by the one and only Ashley M. Jones for Reading Transformation, who's the recent Poet Laureate of Alabama. So join us. And now we'd like to give it back over to Kat for some good old question and answers.
Thank you all so much for that incredible presentation. All right, everyone who is an attendee, if you have any thoughts or questions that you'd like to ask, now is the time to use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. We'll take a minute to see if there is anyone who would like to share, again, their thoughts or questions.
I have the Jeopardy theme song going in my head just in case anybody needs something to pass the time.
That's an incredible suggestion. Wonderful for these moments. All right, Erica said, thank you for the wonderful presentation. The value video was totally what I needed today. Yes, Erica. Jennifer asks, how do you recommend giving support or approaching others who need support?
So, Jennifer, that's a good question. I normally I think it depends on the individual. I like to know what the individual, if I know the individual, what type of relationship I have with that individual will determine how I approach that person. But sometimes I like to just, hey, is there anything I can do to be of assistance? How can I be of help to you? I'd like to be of support. But support looks like different things to different people. Right. So, for example, my kid, because I told them I like to be organized, and they went and surprised me one time and organized our pantry in alphabetical order, and that's not how I do things. But it was that I did say help and support. So I just think it's best. It would have been good if they said, "Mom, how can I support you?" So I think asking people, I'd like to be of support, I could, please feel free, let me know how I may be of help to you. I'd like to work with you, something along those lines. Davlin, any thoughts, Dr. Hughes?
I would say the same. I would also add, there's saying what you can do. So, hey, I'd really like to offer you support. What kind of support do you need? Here's 3 things that I'm able to do. I could provide a meal to you on this day. I can take somebody for a shopping trip, whatever it is. And so that way you're not only giving them ideas, because I know when I was ill, sometimes that people be like, what do you want? And I'm like, I don't know. I just know I need something. Can you just bring whatever you want to eat is fine. We just need calories. And so sometimes it's really helpful when people give you suggestions.
Yeah, I appreciate that for several reasons. I think it's good to give people suggestions of what you really believe you can do. That way you won't be resentful. If they say something and you're like, "Dang on it, I can't do that. I don't have the time to do this, but I said I was going to do it, so I'm going to do it." So we want to make sure that you also be mindful of, doing things that are well within your ability to do, that you're okay with doing. So giving suggestions is always helpful.
Jennifer says, thank you so much.
You're quite welcome.
All right, everyone, we'll take 30 more seconds just in case we missed anything question-wise or comments-wise. So 30 more seconds. All right. Thank you to our panelists for your very thoughtful and insightful presentation. And thank you to all of our viewers for joining us today. And please join us for all of our upcoming presentations. Thank you. Take care, be safe and well, and have a wonderful evening.